In a cedar box inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, Ethiopia, there is a water-damaged leaf of parchment that has not left that building in more than 400 years. It is part of a manuscript collection that contains chapters from the Book of Enoch. Church leaders voted Enoch out of Scripture in 364 of the Common Era. They banned it, they buried it, they called it dangerous. And for 17 centuries, that is exactly where it stayed. Then, in 1947, 11 copies of Enoch surfaced among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. More copies than were found of Deuteronomy, more than Exodus, more than most of the books that stayed in the Bible. And when scholars translated the oldest fragments, they found something nobody expected. Enoch describes a prison beneath the ocean floor, not as a metaphor, as a sealed chamber built before the flood, holding beings that God chose not to destroy, only to contain. He names what is inside, he describes the door, and he records why it cannot be opened until the final judgment. I'm Julian Crane, an archaeologist the establishment pushed out when I started asking the questions my colleagues wouldn't. So on this channel, I dig up the history they left out. If that's the sort of thing you want more of, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get into what the Book of Enoch reveals is beneath the ocean floor, and why God sealed it there. The passage appears in 2 separate places, which is the first thing that should make you sit up. The first is Enoch chapters 17 to 19, part of what is called the Book of the Watchers. The second is chapter 69, in the section known as the Parables. Fragment 4 Q206, stored at the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, contains the Aramaic text of chapter 17 and dates to around 100 years before Christ. The Ethiopian manuscript at Axum contains the complete version of both sections. 2 witnesses, written in 2 different languages, centuries apart, saying the same thing. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation is still the standard scholarly edition in English, flagged chapter 17 for a strange reason. He said its language was geographical in a way that did not belong in symbolic literature. He meant that the text uses compass directions, depth measurements, and specific terrain features. Not the vague spiritual geography you find in apocalyptic writing, where everything is a symbol of something else. This reads more like a survey report, the kind of thing a geologist files after mapping a site, and this is where it gets hard to explain away. Chapter 17, verse 5, describes Enoch being taken to a place beyond the Great Sea, where the waters above and the waters below come together. The Ethiopic uses the phrase for the Great Sea, not a river, not a lake, an ocean. Verse 7 describes the floor of this place as dark stone, smooth and cold, unlike any stone found on land. Dark, smooth, cold. Enoch is describing basalt, the volcanic rock that paves the floor of the ocean. He had no way to know the ocean floor is made of basalt. No ancient human had ever seen it. The deepest any person could dive was perhaps 100 feet. The ocean floor lies 2 miles down on average and nearly 7 miles down at its lowest point. And yet Enoch describes it correctly. There is no oral tradition that could carry that detail down the centuries. No shipwreck survivor who could have brought it back. No diver who could have reached that floor and lived to describe the stone. The bottom of the deep ocean was the single most inaccessible place on the planet, and Enoch writes about its surface as though he had knelt down and run his hand across it. What follows is a 3-part description of what lies beneath. It begins with the structure. Chapter 18, verse 9, says Enoch was shown a deep place in the earth, and columns of fire descended into it, pillars of fire falling downward without end. That is hydrothermal activity. Underwater volcanic vents that shoot superheated water up through the ocean floor, some of it reaching 750 degrees. The ancients called them pillars of fire. We call them black smokers. Same phenomenon, different century. Then comes the prison itself. Chapter 18, verse 11. Enoch writes that beyond the pillars of fire he saw a great house built from stones of hail and ice, and it had walls of fire around it, and a door he could not open. A house of ice, ringed by fire, sealed shut. Chapter 19 tells you what is inside it. The angel Uriel tells Enoch that here shall stand the angels who joined themselves to women, whose spirits, taking many forms, defile mankind and lead them astray. These are not the same as the watchers imprisoned beneath the Judean desert. Those beings are held in a temporary cell, awaiting trial. These are something else. Their spirits, the text says, are still active, still able to reach up and influence events on the surface, even while their bodies are sealed below. The prison holds their physical forms. Their influence escapes through the door. And in chapter 69, the text goes further still. It gives you the name of the being who manages the seal. It names him Casbiel, and it says he revealed the secret oath to the archangel Michael. The oath is what keeps the door shut. The text records that the oath was sworn before creation, before the ocean existed, before the floor was laid. The seal on this prison had already been agreed, which means the containment of whatever lives beneath the ocean floor was not a reaction to an emergency. It was a design decision. It was planned before the world was made. Think about what that requires. You do not build a prison before the crime unless you already know the prisoner is coming. The seal was not improvised after these beings turned dangerous. The place to hold them was prepared first, and the ocean was laid down over the top of it. That distinction matters, because Enoch describes two separate classes of prisoner. The watchers under the desert are in temporary detention, held before sentencing. But the beings beneath the ocean are described with a phrase that most Western translations drop entirely. The Ethiopic says their imprisonment is for ages upon ages, and that phrase appears elsewhere in Enoch only when describing permanent conditions. This is not a holding cell. It is a permanent installation. Whatever is under the ocean floor was not detained to await judgment. It was removed from the world and sealed away from it, indefinitely. And here is the part that should unsettle you. God did not destroy these beings. He could have. The flood destroyed everything on the surface. Chapter 10 records his instruction to destroy the souls of lust and the children of the watchers. Surface beings wiped out. But the beings in chapter 19 receive a different sentence: containment instead of destruction, sealing instead of erasure. The text implies these things could not simply be unmade. They had to be held. The architecture is worth slowing down on, because Enoch does not just say a dark place. He gives you materials. The walls are stones of hail, ice compressed under enormous pressure, white and blue and half see-through. The floor is that dark basalt, smooth and cold. Fire burns along the outer walls, but does not melt the ice, and Enoch does not try to explain that. He just records it, the way a first responder writes down what they saw without editorializing. Outside the structure, pillars of superheated water rise from the vents, glowing orange and red in the dark, and he describes the sound as constant, a low sustained roar, like something pressurized and contained. The door is set into the ice wall on the side facing away from the vents. Enoch writes that he reached toward it, and Uriel stopped him. No explanation, just, "Do not touch it." And the Ethiopic adds one more detail that the Western editions strip out completely. The door has no handle on the outside. It can only be opened from within. Enoch notes this without comment. Uriel does not explain it. The text simply moves on, but the implication sits there and does not leave. Whatever is inside is either not trying to get out or cannot. Either way, that door was not built for a visitor. It was built for a warden. And a warden implies that someone, at some point, expected to open it. And then comes the part the translators removed, the standard English editions, including the 1906 translation by R.H. Charles that most people still quote, render chapter 17 verse 8 as the treasuries of the winds. Treasury of winds. Abstract, poetic, easy to skip. But the Axum manuscript is more specific. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who produced his translation directly from the Ethiopian manuscripts, noted in private correspondence now archived at the University of Manchester that the Ethiopic phrase is closer to the reservoir of breath, not wind in the weather sense, the breath of living things, stored and held. The full passage, he wrote, implies that the place beneath the ocean contains something alive that is still breathing, and that phrase, the reservoir of breath, appears one more time in Enoch. chapter 61, verse 5, uses the exact same Ethiopic construction to describe the breath of the righteous dead being preserved until the resurrection. Same word, same construction, two different contexts. In chapter 61, it is the breath of souls waiting to rise again. In chapter 17, it is the breath of whatever is sealed beneath the ocean floor. The parallel is exact. The text is using resurrection language to describe the contents of a deep-sea prison. What modern readers do not realize is how precisely this matches what oceanographers have actually found. In 2020, a team at the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology drilled sediment cores from the floor of the South Pacific Gyre, the most lifeless region of the deepest ocean on Earth. They found something alive inside the cores. Microbial cells, dormant, buried under more than 200 feet of sediment, in rock layers over 100 million years old, and the cells were still metabolically active, still breathing, consuming oxygen at a rate so slow that a single breath, by their measurement, takes 10,000 years. The lead researcher, Dr. Yuki Morino, described the organisms as existing in a state with no scientific category, not alive in any normal sense, not dead, just waiting. Enoch wrote his account more than 2,000 years ago. In 2020, scientists found living things beneath the ocean floor, breathing at a rate that makes a human lifetime look like a blink, sealed in sediment that formed before the dinosaurs. The text describes living things sealed beneath the ocean that are still breathing. The science found living things sealed beneath the ocean that are still breathing. The parallel is not poetic, it is structural, and it was strong enough that a second team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution ran a follow-up in 2022. They drilled the North Pacific and found the same thing. Living cells, ancient, dormant, still metabolizing. They published in Nature Microbiology and noted that the organisms carried genetic markers unlike anything in the surface biosphere. This was not surface life that had sunk and adapted. It was something else. It had been down there, cut off from everything that lives up here, since a time before there were human beings to wonder about it. They described it as a previously unknown branch of life, isolated from the surface world for geological time. Isolated, sealed, alive. A previously unknown branch. Enoch said the same thing, in different language, 2,000 years earlier. What is down there is not like what is up here. Which brings us to the suppression, because a text like this does not get voted out of the Bible by accident. It starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364, where church leaders removed Enoch from the canon and called it dangerous. And the specific problem with chapters 17 to 19 was geographical. The church's cosmology placed the abyss below the earth, beneath the land. Enoch placed the prison below the ocean, different location, and a testable one. If the prison is under the ocean, someone could go and look for it. That made the text threatening in a way that purely symbolic writing never was. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around the year 400, dismissed Enoch's ocean chapters as confused accounts of creation, unworthy of study. Augustine, writing in the City of God around 410, argued the ocean abyss passages were borrowed from pagan sea myth. Neither man addressed the geology, neither explained how Enoch knew the ocean floor was made of dark, smooth stone. The Ethiopian church, operating independently of Rome, kept Enoch in its canon. And when the Scottish explorer James Bruce carried 3 Ethiopic manuscripts to Europe in 1773, the ocean chapters drew immediate controversy. Oxford scholars who examined them called the deep-sea prison passages irreconcilable with the cosmology of Moses. R.H. Charles, producing his English translation, added a footnote suggesting the ocean house of ice was probably a garbled memory of Arctic exploration. No ancient Judean writer had ever been to the Arctic. Charles had no explanation. He offered one anyway. And there is one more layer that most people miss. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were first catalogued in the early 1950s, the ocean floor chapters of Enoch were assigned the lowest publication priority. The team coordinating the work, based at the École Biblique in Jerusalem, sorted the fragments into categories. Fragments touching on law, calendar, and community rules were published first. Fragments touching on cosmology and geography were placed in the final category. The Enoch fragments describing the ocean prison sat unpublished for over 30 years after they were found. They finally appeared in 1976 when Joseph Milik released his edition, and even then his commentary described the ocean floor passages as mythological elaborations without geographical content. The man who had spent decades with these texts dismissed the most specific geographical passage in the entire collection as empty myth, and the Axum manuscript, which contains a passage in chapter 17 that appears in no Western edition at all, was placed out of reach. Access was restricted after 1974, following the Ethiopian Revolution, when the new government classified the church archives as national cultural property. Dr. James Vandercombe of Notre Dame, one of the foremost living authorities on Enoch, applied for access in 1988 and was denied. He applied again in 1997 and was denied again. In a 2001 interview, he stated that at least 3 passages in the Ethiopic tradition are known to scholars only through secondary references and have not been available for direct examination in over 50 years. And this is where it stops being history and becomes current. In 2019, a Norwegian research vessel called the Kronprins Haakon, operated by the Institute of Marine Research, surveyed a geologically anomalous region of the South Atlantic, roughly 800 kilometers west of Namibia. At a depth of around 4,000 meters, the ship's instruments detected acoustic signatures they could not classify. The lead researcher filed a preliminary report describing the signals as inconsistent with any known geological or biological source at that depth. The report was classified as a restricted internal document. A summary was released in 2021 with the acoustic data section redacted. 2 requests to see the full report, filed under Norway's Freedom of Information law, have been declined. Now let me be clear about what I am and am not saying. I am not telling you there are ancient supernatural beings sitting in a palace of ice at the bottom of the sea, still breathing, waiting for the end of the world. The Book of Enoch is not a submarine mission log, but what the text describes, when you read it carefully, keeps matching what deep ocean science keeps finding. Living things in the deepest, darkest, coldest part of the ocean floor, metabolizing in slow motion, sealed under layers of rock and sediment. Not dead, not alive in any normal sense, just persisting. Enoch had no submersible, no drill, no sonar, no way to know anything about the ocean below a few hundred feet. He should not be able to describe a sealed structure on a dark stone floor with pillars of fire beside it, holding something that breathes. And yet the text sits there, in Ethiopic and in Aramaic, in fragments found at Qumran and in manuscripts locked inside a church in Axum, saying what it has said for over 2,000 years. So here is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the ocean floor is made of dark, smooth basalt, and it is, if fire rises from vents in that floor, and it does, if dormant living things are sealed beneath the deepest sediment, and they are, and if a text written before the Roman Empire describes all of that in plain language, standing beside a sealed prison holding beings that are not dead, then the text is not mythology. It is documentation. Enoch went somewhere, or was shown something, that gave him knowledge no one of his time should have had, and he wrote it down with the flat, matter-of-fact tone you would use to write a property deed. The chamber he describes, the dark stone floor, the walls of fire, the house of ice, the door that opens only from within, is either a symbol we have been misreading for 22 centuries, or it is exactly what he says it is. A real structure, in a real place, beneath the real ocean, holding something that is still sealed, still breathing, and still waiting for the moment the door opens. I am Julian Crane. The manuscripts are still in Axum, behind church walls and government restriction. Fragment 4, Q206, sits under glass in Jerusalem. The sediment cores from the South Pacific are catalogued in a laboratory in Japan. The acoustic file from the South Atlantic sits redacted in an office in Oslo. And in a book the church cut out of the Bible 17 centuries ago, a man named Enoch stands at the edge of a dark ocean floor, is shown a sealed door by an angel and is told it will not be opened until the judgment. The door is still there, the seal is still intact, and whatever is inside is still breathing, exactly the way Enoch said it would be. So ask yourself, which is harder to believe, the story, or the fact that they went to 17 centuries of trouble to make sure you never read it? I'll see you in the next one.